All right, Mike, more serious stuff. China has been using this, everybody's got their eye off the ball with the coronavirus, and they're acting really aggressive in other areas, South China Sea. I'm hearing a lot of things happen in the Caribbean. What's happening right now with China? Was this possibly a big distraction by them?
Well, this Mao quote, Mao had originally said that everything under heaven is in utter chaos. The situation is excellent. And in a sense, I think this new regime in China is drawing on that. They see the fact that the United States and Western democracies are completely glued onto the management of this coronavirus, and they've been taking advantage of our distractions in a whole bunch of ways. Number one has been a pretty aggressive military buildup, both in dollars and adventurousness, including in the South China Sea, as you referenced. Number two, importantly, is in this ongoing crackdown in Hong Kong, which is an absolute unequivocal violation of the terms of agreement that China and the UK reached back in 1997 on Hong Kong, that would allow for Hong Kong to basically maintain political and economic independence for 50 years. And in an ongoing series of other domestic human rights crises and aggressions, including troops now at the India border that are presenting another geopolitical challenge and threat. And I think, we're sort of, which I suspect we're going to hear some real bluntness from the president coming up this afternoon at this press conference, beginning to see, as kind of Churchill warned after World War II about the Soviet Union, that China is emerging as a singular and undeniable threat to the United States in the 21st century. And I think many of those who are maybe a little more hardline on China would say, hey, we should have seen this coming 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I can recall, DC and being there even in the 80s and 90s, inquiring on a lot of these topics. The position of all of the sinologists was always, look, as China's economy grows, they'll become more integrated with the West. They'll become more peaceful, less aggressive, more respectful of human rights. This was basically the Henry Kissinger line that was mimicked by just about every sinologist in the political establishment. And I just don't think they could turn it out to be more wrong on literally every front, strategically, in their economic aggressions and transgressions, and in their human rights violations. This is a regime that is emerging as an undeniable threat to the United States and to peace and freedom.
No doubt.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Michael. I've been saying this for years, and I really think this was one of the key reasons Donald Trump was able to break away from the pack in the crowded Republican primary in 2016 and in the general election, because he was actually willing to say the truth about China and how our leaders in both parties have kind of sold out our own country for some cheap labor, some cheap goods, and for people willing to lend us money. I'm curious, Michael, now that we see them crushing autonomy in Hong Kong, and you saw the announcement from Mike Pompeo this week saying Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. The House, because of what they're doing with that, and because of what they're doing with the Uyghurs, where they're basically putting Muslims in concentration camps in China, the House recently adopted sanctions. So did the Senate. What do you think these sanctions are going to mean for the future of American and Chinese relations? And there are a lot of Americans, especially farmers, that rely upon exports to China of things like soybeans. How is that going to affect our economy going forward?
Well, and the other thing with dealing with China is there's always reciprocity, meaning we make move A and they have counter move to move A, and you have to anticipate that. On the other hand, you cannot allow to occur the obvious let's call it generously, the mishandling, but it could even be maliciousness of the coronavirus by China, combined with all of these acts. There need to be ramifications. That was a lesson we learned during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, that what really kept the Soviet Union at bay during the Cold War and ultimately ended the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And I think that the comparisons are beginning to become much more transparent between really the Cold War that existed between the Soviet Union and the United States and what's emerging now between China and the United States, except for the fact that China is much more politically sophisticated. I think the president alluded to that, as you correctly said, in 2016. I think he called them more cunning. And I would agree with that. I think we're dealing with a government, to be fair, that is immensely strategic, very aggressive, but also very sort of diplomatic in being able to hide those aggressions. So we have this, literally on every front with them, geostrategically, economically, and their cyber crimes. You can recall they just recently we indicted, I think, 4 PLA officers for their breaking into Equifax credit union, accessing credit records on millions of Americans. They broke into the presidential personnel office. Additionally, during the Obama administration, accessing hundreds of thousands of U.S. government employees' clearance records and other hugely sensitive data. And, I think you also can look at China much the way we looked at the Soviet Union, is it's kind of an unnatural empire held together by force. I mean, that's certainly the situation with Tibet, which would certainly choose independence if it were afforded the option. That's certainly the case with Hong Kong, with Taiwan, which maintains its independence, with East Turkestan, which you made reference to with the Uyghurs. That's one of the, in my judgment, one of the most egregious and intolerable human rights conditions in the entire world. 1 to 2 million Uyghurs being held in detention and re-education camps exclusively because of their religious and ethnic identity. So we said never again as it related to the Holocaust. And well, maybe nothing completely replicates that. It's always, I think, dangerous to compare things to Nazi Germany or to Hitler. Here we've got a 7-figure number of people being held against their will in re-education detention camps, slave labor, documented extraordinary human rights abuses throughout the country, really. A complete legal system that's controlled by the Communist Party, and an aggressive president who puts on a big smile to the rest of the world, but ultimately is very much about maintaining and advancing China's security standing and their power globally.
Yeah, that's for sure. We've been talking about it on the show a lot. China, they don't really care about their people. They don't really care about time. And they're on like a 100-year plan. So they're very, very diligent at work. Mike, I want to thank you very much for always joining us. And I want to thank you for even adding a new dimension to Mike Johns. He's also quite comedic. Mike, have a great weekend.
You guys have a good weekend. Thank you.
Take care, Michael.
Quick break. Wrap it up right after this with the WTF.